Good morning, Rotarians and guests.
Good morning, Ron.
Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. I'm Ron Strobel, the Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Jim Young.
Good morning, Rotarians.
Good morning.
Our old friend Jimmy Sutphin used to say, the greatest sin was the sin of ungratefulness. With that in mind, let us pray. When we remember that gratitude is an action, we are reminded that our responsibility is to demonstrate thankfulness. An attitude of grateful appreciation is an act of kindness to those around us. Take a moment to think about what you appreciate today and be thankful for the kindness you receive. Amen.
Thank you, Jim. To lead us in the pledge and four-way test, Donna Kastner.
Join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the four-way test. First,
Is it the truth?
second,
Is it fair to all concerned?
third,
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, Donna. And to lead us in song, Dick Pearsall.
With all the turmoil going on and everything, I think we need a little divine guidance. So this morning I just thought we'd sing God Bless America. So here we go. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairie, build it, to the ocean. What would fall, let it go. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Once more now, God bless America, my home, sweet home. I think we straightened out a lot of things.
Thank you, Dick. And now our president, David Basil.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning, fellow Rotarians.
Good morning, David.
It's getting light earlier and earlier. I like it more and more. Thank you for the song, Dick. Always great choices, and today was no exception, certainly. We only have as a guest our speaker who will be introduced later, and Ariana, our service learning student. Thank you for being with us today, Ariana. Next, a new member induction. So if Rich Warfield and Evan and Clint Samuel could come up, please.
You notice how Clint, he's going to get inducted. He's sitting there with the women over there, schmoozing with him. They were corrupting him before he came in. Bad girl table.
I think they object to that. Okay, it is our pleasure and our privilege to induct our newest member, Clint Samuel. Clint, on behalf of the board and membership of the Rotary Club of Hudson, it is a great pleasure to welcome you as the newest member of our club. We look forward to the fellowship that we will share, as well as your participation in many club projects that make our community, our country, and our world a better place in which to live. Rotary is an organization of business and professional people pledged to uphold the highest ethical and moral standards. Rotarians believe that worldwide fellowship and peace can be achieved when business people unite with the Rotary motto of service above self. Rotary activities exemplify the charity and sacrifice that one would expect from people who believe that they have a responsibility to help others. You have been chosen for membership in the Rotary Club of Hudson because your fellow members believe you to be a leader in our community and because you possess the qualities to champion the message and principles of Rotary. You now become an ambassador of Rotary, carrying the ideals of Rotary, the ideals of service to all within your sphere of influence. Our community will know and judge Rotary by your character and your service. We will also look to you for inspiration as we strive to become better Rotarians ourselves. We now ask your sponsoring Rotarians, Evan and Rich, to vest you with the distinguishing badge of a Rotarian, your Rotary pin, and name badge. And we ask that you wear them with pride, not only to all Rotary functions, but in your many endeavors as a symbol of your commitment to Rotary ideals and our recognition of your contributions to a better world. Fellow Rotarians, please join me in welcoming our newest member, Clint Samuel.
All right, did you want to say something, Clint?
Please.
Doesn't he look all nice dressed up there?
Wow, quite a surprise. I mean, obviously I knew I was becoming a member, but wasn't sure if it was going to be today or next week, but I'm glad it is today. I'm glad I've been able to spend the last few months in the morning with all of you and moving around, getting to sit at a couple of different tables and interact. I really appreciate the warm reception that I've received from everyone has been coming to the meetings. The speakers are phenomenal, all of you. As you already know, that you're all an amazing group. And I think, what was our speaker's name? Wayne McLeod.
I remember that one.
I'm glad he's not here to ask me. You know? Donald Wayne McLeod. How could I forget? You know? But nevertheless, yeah. So I look forward to, joining different groups throughout the day or throughout the month. I'm greeting next month, so I'll have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time chatting with everyone at the front as you come in. I appreciate. I look forward to working and getting giving my service to the community and working with all of you. Thank you.
And next, we have a very special presentation for a long-standing and dedicated member of Rotary and our club, Den Rich and Joe Zapatowski. And Joe, I will let you do the honors of the announcement.
Good morning, Rotarians.
Good morning, Joe.
We're here this morning to make a presentation. Paul Harris Foundation does so much good around the world. It's one of the foremost foundations in our country. It has the highest marks. It provides the greatest percentage of incoming dollars to do good internationally. And we have with us today a member who has reached the level of Paul Harris +1, which means that his contributions and points have amounted to 2,000. And it is with great deal of pleasure that I present our president with the pin so that he can pin our newest Paul Harris Fellow +2.
Thank you,
Jen, thank
Pleasure.
you.
Thank you. Joe.
Thank you, Joe. As Joe mentioned, the Paul Harris Foundation is one of Rotary's signature efforts, and it was begun by a Clevelander, Arch Klumpf, who was president of the Cleveland Club, began the foundation with a contribution, I forget the exact amount, I think $26.50. I knew it was 26, but I didn't know the exact cents. But it's amazing, what it has become and what it has accomplished. Any other announcements from the floor for the good of the order? If there are none, if Jim Ahern, if you would come up and introduce our speaker, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Joe Avella.
You'd really put Jim on the spot there. If you, so today is February. We begin our program series on world affairs. Should be a very interesting month. Next week, in the future weeks, we will hear from Professor Karen Leith, who will talk about a recent trip to Cuba. We'll hear from Professor James Stanley, who will give us an update on a primer on world affairs. And we'll hear from former U.S. Ambassador Heather Hodges, who is the president of the Cleveland Council on World Affairs. But today we have with us Todd Heiser. Todd is international trade specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service, which is part of the Department of Commerce. Todd's going to talk a little bit more about that. Todd joined the U.S. Commercial Service in 2008. Before that, he worked at Clamco Corporation, which is a manufacturer of packaging equipment, working his way up from customer service to general manager. Back in 1998, when he was the VP of International Sales, he was awarded the Governor's Excellence in Exporting Award by Governor George Voinovich. He was appointed in 2001 to the general manager, driving the sales team. And during his 18 years in packaging, Todd traveled extensively around the world, setting up distribution in Asia, the Middle East, Europe, North America, and South America. He resides in Bainbridge. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Pittsburgh in political science and economics, and had a master's in administration Business Administration from Baldwin Wallace College. So members, let's give a warm Rotary welcome to Todd Heiser.
Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. That sounded a lot more impressive than I remember. I think it was overstated a little bit, but thank you for inviting me this morning, and thank you for your attention this morning. As Joe mentioned, I currently work for the U.S. Commercial Service, which is part of the International Trade Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Leave it to government to have about 14 different titles all the way through, so you can never figure out exactly what department or anything that we can do. But essentially what we are is the export promotion agency for the federal government. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do and how we do it, but beyond that, I want to talk a little bit more about international trade to kind of kick off your trade month that you're talking about, because it's pretty much been in the news throughout the campaign cycle and throughout now the early stages of the Trump administration. So again, as a lead trade promotion agency of the federal government, we have offices throughout the United States. I'm based here locally. I cover Stark, Summit, and Portage counties for our office. But we have offices throughout the United States. Our overall office covers all of northern Ohio, from Toledo to Youngstown down to Columbus and everywhere in between. And then we also have an office in Cincinnati in Ohio here. But same thing happens from Florida to Washington and Maine to California. We have offices. But I think even more impressive than that is we have offices in 75 to 80 countries around the world in the embassies and consulates. And all of our mission is to help U.S. companies, particularly small and medium-sized companies, grow their businesses by exporting. We do a little bit in the foreign direct investment sector, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's essentially what we do is try and help small businesses. And we do help the Timkins of the world and the Goodyears and those kind of folks occasionally, but we were created in the early 80s to primarily help small, mid-sized companies that don't have large international departments, that don't have staff of thousands to do this sort of thing, and we try and help those folks grow. Just another slide about that we're everywhere. But one of the things I like to point out too that some folks, especially in the United States, don't often think of is that 95% of the world's consumers are outside the United States. There's a lot of small businesses, a lot of mid-sized businesses, a lot of large businesses. Their entire business model is serving the United States. And I also often, one of the first questions I ask normally is, well, how many folks are exporting? So let's ask that in the room. How many have you worked in international trade or your companies that you work with export? A few? How about you guys sell to Canada? That's one of the questions I always ask. They say, no, we don't export. I'm like, well, do you sell to Canada? They say, yeah. I'm like, well, that's exporting. So one of the things we do is how do we help small businesses or how do we help mid-sized businesses? We help with market intelligence. So one of the things we can do is help companies find their next customer. What are the top 10 or 15 export markets for an individual product? And I having been in the manufacturing business for so long, I still say products all the time. But we do help service companies, whether they're architectural firms or whatever. But when I say product, just keep in mind that I'm also referring to services or essentially anything that can be sold overseas. But we can help you with market intelligence, finding where your products may be able to be sold. We can help with trade counseling, where we can help, documentation. How do we fill this document out? How do we do, how do we ship? How do we get paid? That kind of stuff. But the thing we really do well is business matchmaking, where we can actually find customers for your business overseas. I'm going to kind of go through some of these slides pretty quickly because I think one of the more interesting things to talk about is the current status of the U.S. views on international trade. But this kind of gives you an idea of some of the offices we have around the world. So again, you see lots of the blue ones there in the U.S., but all those red little bubbles are offices that we have. And for an example, China. We have about 200 staff members in China just to help U.S. companies sell to China. And when I say staff members, one of the other interesting things that I think about our organization is that we have U.S. officers that are U.S. citizens that work from post to post. They change jobs every 2 or 3 years, moving to a different country to lead the teams of staff members. But in all those offices around the world, we hire what we call locally employed staff. So they are U.S. government employees, but in the case of China, they're Chinese. We hire Chinese citizens. We hire Italian citizens. We hire Brazilian citizens, so that they understand and they know the culture, the language, the way business is done in that country, all those type of things, rather than me having to learn Portuguese in Brazil and figure out how business is done and all that. We hire local Brazilians, for example. So it allows us to have that expertise and to share that expertise with U.S. companies. We also have some industry teams, and I'll just kind of skip through a little bit about this, but we have industry and regional teams that focus on certain industries and regions. I think the industry teams are more interesting, I think. So, for example, I lead our agribusiness team, which is a group of colleagues that focuses on the agricultural sector. Now, we don't do the food because, again, in the government way, we have to have silos, right? There's the U.S. Department of Agriculture that handles the actual food. But we work with the companies that manufacture farming equipment, silos, fertilizers, all that type of thing. But one of the reasons I'm leading the agribusiness team is we also lump into that category food processing equipment, packaging equipment, how are we going to get that food to market, that sort of thing. But we have education specialists, we have energy and environment specialists. The way we look at it, and especially like for education, bringing students to the United States to attend local universities is an export because we're getting revenue from an overseas source. So we actually help local universities like Kent State and Akron and Walsh and a lot of the local universities bring international students to the United States. As I mentioned, one of the things, the primary thing I do is work with small to mid-sized businesses. And this is an example of a small business that manufactures machinery that seals large tarps and plastics and all kinds of different things. And we were able to set them up with a distributor in Russia and start selling. And then a lot of people think, well, that's got to be a hard market, and all the talk between Putin and the administration now and everything else that we're not doing business in Russia. There are some sanctions on certain parties in Russia, but there's a lot of business being done between the United States and Russia. But this is one of the things, too, that I'm proudest about our organization is we're a results-based organization. We report to Congress and our stakeholders every year the amount of businesses that we help, the companies that we help, and the sales they grow, and hopefully hire more American workers. For every dollar that's invested in our organization, our agency, we've been able to track and show that we return $266 to the U.S. economy through increased sales. And they're not fudged numbers, they're not projected numbers, they're not that kind of thing. We go back to the owners of the businesses like Miller Weldmaster, which is a small company down in Navarre, just outside of Canton, and say, hey, did that trip we set up to introduce you to potential customers in Russia result in any sales? And they come back to us and say, yeah, we had a couple new sales, it was $80,000, whatever it was, and that's what we report. So I actually think we return a lot more to the economy than $266 because not every company is willing to release their sales numbers, as you might imagine. When I was a small business, when I was running the small business, we weren't exactly forthcoming with a lot of our sales and marketing and type. So again, we can do everything from helping to make sure you're export ready, identifying the key markets that might be open for your products or services, determine the potential, and then help you implement an export plan. If you're not exporting at all, we can help you on the first steps. If you're exporting to 1 or 2 markets, we can help you find additional markets. I'm not going to go through all the different things, but just I think the takeaway is we can help you with things, everything from regulatory issues, intellectual property issues. You know, folks that manufacture products are always nervous about exporting their products, whether they're going to get copied or stolen or whatever. documentation. Every country has the right to have whatever documents they need to make sure your product gets in there. I was talking to someone earlier talking about food products getting stuck coming into the country. Well, that's the U.S. documentation issues and customs. We can help with some of those, not the import side, but on the export side. If any of you are running businesses and you get products stuck at the border and whatnot, I can help you with that sort of thing. We also do a lot of research. We have all kinds of guides about how to do business in certain countries. Again, whether it's cultural, whether it's economic, whether it's legal and regulatory, we do that sort of thing. We do background reports on foreign firms. So those of you that deal primarily in the U.S., you do what? You probably run a Dun & Bradstreet report on a potential customer, decide if you're going to offer them any kind of payment terms. We can do background reports on foreign firms. But again, the matchmaking, one of the things we do is we ask you what your ideal partner would be in a particular market. In my case, in the packaging industry, we sold through distribution because we wanted someone to be able to sell. Let me back up. I was talking about packaging machinery. We were one of the ones that made the machinery, puts that annoying shrink wrap packaging that you probably all cuss at us about because you can't open it, right? Well, our customers demanded that you couldn't open it, just so you know. So, and even though I've been out of this industry for 8 years, I still go to the store, and if I see like a hole in the plastic or there's wrinkles on the corners or whatever, I'm like, how is that allowed to be on the shelf? My customers would never let me get away with that. But we sold through a distribution channel that could sell that plastic, sell our machinery, service our machinery, and do that whole thing. So I would be looking for a distributor that could do all that sort of thing. And what our organization would do is say, okay, here's the top 10 or 15 markets. If you're not exporting to us, let's see if we can find those distribution channels for you based on your criteria. And then set up a trip for you to go over and interview them. I learned a long time ago that people buy from people. Even though we have Skype now and email and everything else, it still seems to be the most successful strategy is to go visit, show that you're serious in the market, go talk to the folks and support them. So we set up trips to do exactly that. Our overseas staff will go with you if there's a language problem. We help with local transportation so you know that you're getting in a proper a driver to take you somewhere instead of just hopping in a cab in Mexico City and hoping you arrive there with your kidney, you know, and not drive off somewhere else. We do a lot of trade events. We do trade missions, those kind of things. But a lot of it, it's all about how can we help grow businesses and export. One of the exciting things is we're going to have a big trade conference here in Northeast Ohio coming up in September. We're already promoting it a little bit. I'm sure all of you have got your calendars full all the way through September already. But if it isn't full, we'd like to invite you to this Discover Global Markets Forum series. We're going to be focused. There's one going on in Arizona. I don't expect everyone to drop and get on a plane in 2 weeks to go to Arizona, although it would be nice to get out of the snow. But in September, we're going to be inviting experts in the automotive industry, aerospace industry, advanced manufacturing, and foreign direct investment for those of you that might be in economic development in the room. We also do foreign direct investment where we encourage overseas companies to come here and build factories, hire U.S. workers, that sort of thing. They're all coming to Cleveland. My overseas colleagues from Europe are coming to Cleveland, all to help educate and assist local businesses on growing their business. It's a 3-day conference. Most of it's in downtown Cleveland. I think they're going to have a reception at the Rock Hall, so it should be a very educational opportunity and also a good time. But we also do some trade missions, like one to Southeast Europe here, Romania, Bulgaria. It's probably hard to see at the bottom, but we do a lot of that sort of thing to, you know, get 10 or 15 small businesses to go together to one market so that you can learn together and you can meet and learn how to do business in that market. The last couple slides are how everyone loves us, but I'll skip over that. But they do, just saying. My contact information is here. I have an office at Kent State University right down the road. As I said, I service myself this local area, but my colleagues cover all of Northern Ohio. So I know most of you are based here in Hudson, but if you work in other places around Northern Ohio, we can help you. But again, what I thought was, unless there's questions on this portion of it, I wanted to talk about and kind of I don't like lecturing people. I'd rather ask you what everyone thinks about this current debate in our American politics about free trade versus protectionism. It could really change international trade right now. And the talk is, do we want to renegotiate NAFTA and get out of that free trade agreement to make it more pro-U.S.? Or do we continue down free trade? Yeah.
I just think we should have learned that lesson, that isolationism is
We're going
good.
to ask you to use a microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot about that. I thought we learned that isolation doesn't work, especially in a global world, in a global economy. And we're going to be sitting here sucking our thumbs if we want to get out of all of our trade agreements. Not that they don't need work, but I think there's a lot of uninformed decision-making going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in a lot of cases, especially I have children, one in high school, one in college, and when they go on the internet to source things, they don't look where it is, right? They just, okay, what's the best price for the commodity or the item that I'm looking to buy? So if we isolate ourselves, there's another question over. But yeah, I mean, it's a total change from the previous administration. The previous administration was all about free trade agreements. They signed one in Colombia, Korea, a couple others, and they were negotiating TPP. And one of the first executive orders that President Trump did was to back us out of TPP.
So do you have any of your little bubbles in Australia or Papua New Guinea?
Mm-hmm.
Papua New Guinea?
Well, we have 2 offices in Australia. I don't know that we have any in New Guinea, though.
Papua New Guinea, which is north of Australia.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we have 2 offices in Australia, and we have a free trade agreement with Australia, and actually one of our, as Ohioans, one of our top, generally speaking, depending on the commodity, it's about a top 10 export market for Ohio companies.
Actually, I had a question about your first part and then a
Sure.
comment on the second. The question is, so in a prior life, I worked with telecommunications, and we sold equipment and ran phone companies in Latin America and other places. And they often wanted us, we were dealing with the government, so they wanted us to set up their financing.
Mm-hmm.
And then often they also want us to find markets for their products as part of the agreement. So I was wondering if that's part of the services you do. And then the comment I was going to make is that, I think I'm on both sides of this. In terms of an agreement, obviously you don't want to compete with a country where their cost structure is low due to low paid labor and that sort of thing. So on one hand, you want them to be fair. On the other hand, I know in the grocery business, we sell a lot of avocados. Those are only grown in Mexico. So if we can't buy the avocados, there's not. And then on the flip side, we have products in the U.S. that they don't have. So free trade does work when each country has something that they produce that other countries want and vice versa. So in general, I'm for free trade, but obviously we gotta make sure the agreements are proper.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, I think the origins of trade were just what you were saying. Certain regions or countries or whatever have strengths in certain things, whether it's commodities, whether it's fruits and vegetables, whether it's manufacturing, steel. So they said, okay, we'll trade you steel for oranges, and that's kind of how trade started. And as far as Mexico goes, one of the things that's being floated around right now is the value-added tax. I don't know how many of you may have taken cruises or traveled for business or whatever, but a lot of countries have value-added VAT tax put on their products. Well, we don't put a VAT tax on imports right now. So if in your example, if you're bringing in avocados from Mexico and they put a 20% tax on it, you're not going to eat that 20%, are you? You're going to increase the cost of the avocados to cost. So it may be protecting it, but then, like you said, if we can't grow avocados in here, are we really protecting our industries? But that's the thought on some of these taxes and duties. Like, for example, Brazil has huge duties and tariffs and VAT taxes on their products to protect their industries. That's one of the top complaints I get from most U.S. businesses is it makes Brazil very difficult to deal with because it is very expensive. And when I say expensive, sometimes it's 80% on top of the cost of your good because they want you to build it in Brazil. Back to your question about the financing, my agency doesn't do it, but we work closely with another government agency called Exim Bank that does export finance. And they do everything from credit insurance, where you can get insurance on your receivables. So if you sell, one of the big questions I get all the time is, well, how do I get paid? Everyone gets nervous that if we're going to sell to, Vietnam or Greece or Russia or whatever, how am I going to get paid? Well, there's a couple different things. And our first response, everyone's first response, especially in the U.S., is prepay me. Give me all the money up front, then I'll send you the product. Which seems not nice, but that doesn't really build a good relationship with your customer, does it? You're saying, I don't trust you, send me all the money, then I'll send you the product. Exim Bank does credit insurance, where you can offer open terms to these customers and still have an insurance policy on those receivables and get paid if they don't pay you. They also do what they call buyer financing, which was what you were alluding to earlier, is you can actually get a U.S. bank to finance your overseas customer to buy American products, and it's backed by Exim Banks so that they do the guarantee on the loan. Only trade geeks like me probably followed it, but when Exim Bank was actually disappropriated, they were closed down a little bit last summer for about 6 months, because the argument was their corporate welfare, that we shouldn't be helping companies that way. One of the biggest advocates of that is Boeing. Boeing sells their airplanes all around the world to a variety of airlines, and they use that financing because if you think about it, one of the advantages of that financing is a U.S. bank might be able to offer a loan to, I don't know, Korean Air at 5 or 6% interest, where maybe, that's not the great example. Let's pick Brazil. If their interest rates are 18 or 20%, they have to borrow the money at 18 or 20%. Where we can go in and say, well, you can borrow from a U.S. bank, which helps the U.S. bank. They have the loan, they get the fees, they get the interest at 6%, and that way they'll buy a Boeing instead of an Airbus or one of the other competitors. It just gives them that advantage to be able to sell in the international arena. And it happens for small businesses. In my business, we had an Exim Bank credit insurance policy so that I could sell around the world on open terms and still tell my owner he could sleep at night, because if that company fell off the planet somewhere, I could file a claim and get 95% of the money back. So it worked out pretty well in both directions there. So no, our agency doesn't specifically do that, but we can help you find, there's also private sector suppliers of that type of insurance and financing as well. Another question?
I understand that the sort of nuance isn't between protectionism and free trade, but between making bilateral deals versus multilateral deals. So one-on-one United States with Mexico, one-on-one United States with Canada versus North America. Is it possible to do that, to do bilateral deals and come out with a better free trade policy for everybody? And can you do that when you make everybody mad at you first before you begin to even negotiate with them? That's another part of that. Is it possible to do bilateral deals like that and be advantageous, especially to the United States, but to other countries as well, versus doing multilateral deals?
Well, I'd say it's possible for sure. We have 20-something free trade agreements, and most of them are bilateral. They are with individual countries like Korea or Australia or some of those. We have one with Jordan and a few others. So it certainly is possible, and I think the advantages to that is there are always specific and unique challenges between two countries versus maybe 10 countries or even 2 countries. I mean, the economy of Canada and the economy of Mexico are completely different. They're natural partners because we have borders, obviously, with both of those two. But that's why some of these negotiations take so long as well, because every country is trying to protect whatever industry is their bread and butter. So, you wouldn't believe some of the stuff they fight over in some of these free trade agreements. Like Colombia, we have a free trade agreement with Colombia. One of the biggest stumbling points was fresh flowers, which if you go to Heinen's or any of the local flower places, a lot of those flowers are actually coming from Colombia. But U.S. flower growers were really worried about that sort of thing, so they negotiated on that sort of thing. And there's a lot of associations and groups, whether it's flowers or the Orange Growers Association or the automotive companies. With South Korea, there was a big discussion on automotive manufacturers because we have a lot of Korean cars in the United States, Kia and Hyundai. But Korea was basically closed to U.S. car manufacturers. So that was one of the big negotiating points with Korea was we need free access to Korea to sell Fords and Chevys and all that sort of thing. So that was a big part of that negotiation. So to your point, I think the multilateral ones are much more complicated and therefore more generalized, where a single country, you can address certain topics that might not be important to others. The car industry in Vietnam might not be as important as the car industry in, say, Japan and Korea was. For TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that was in the news the first week of Trump's presidency, everyone was arguing pro and against it. But TPP was with, I think, 12 countries, and all of them had different challenges. So that may be one of the strategies that they're looking at, is we'll negotiate maybe one directly with Mexico and a different one with Canada, as opposed to having them both tied in together.
In our country, we have a lot of states' rights. Do any states have the rights to negotiate trade agreements with other countries or other states within countries?
No, I believe that is by law subject to the federal government. States can't negotiate with countries on that level. It has to be federal to federal.
How about individual companies?
No, they're not allowed to create law that way. I mean, obviously you can do a business agreement, but you can't have them drop duty and tariff on one company, because can you imagine their other competitors would be pretty upset about that if that happened.
So,
yeah.
Thanks.
But that being said, I mean, to that point a little bit, cities do have and towns have sister agreements and things like that but a lot of that's more about tourism and foreign direct investment and that sort of thing. Like I know Canton has a sister city agreement with a city in China to work with them.
Question on how do our trade agreements compare with China's trade agreements? Are there any significant differences in that? That's one question. Second question is based back to question on states. Is your department going to help many states export to California? With all the rules and regs that they have, like another country?
Well, and all the talk of secession out there too. They might be another country. Who knows? So I'm not an expert on Chinese free trade agreements, but I can tell you the things about our free trade agreements that a lot of people don't think about. Is the TPP agreement had a lot of focus on raising the labor and safety standards of those foreign countries to our levels. We can't tell them they have to raise their wages to a certain level, but to participate in the agreement, a lot of them had to then adjust their safety standards to similar to ours to OSHA, for example. They were addressing things like child labor laws and things like that to make them more competitive. It also gave us a seat at the table to discuss regulations and safety regulations and that sort of thing as well. So it's not just strictly a free trade as far as taking duties and tariffs off. Some of the goals of these agreements are to raise the world's labor standards. Now, it's pure speculation on my point. I can't imagine China really cares about that sort of thing. Because they don't have a lot of those standards in their economy, so they're probably not trying to encourage other countries to establish more strict safety and worker rights standards. So, but again, I haven't read theirs, but that would be my speculation, is that they don't certainly do that. But that's one of the things that a lot of, the focus on free trade agreements is the duties and tariff side, but the reason they take years and years to negotiate, because a lot of it has to do with, again, protecting certain industries, but also trying to raise those labor standards. To the point of the cheap labor, I think the intended goal is to try and raise the cost of that labor more to our standards, because we have to do certain things to keep workers safe, to make sure things are going smoothly. So we're trying to make that a level playing field that way, so that ultimately wages would go up at the same pace. Yeah.
Both presidential candidates in the campaign had put free trade in the crosshairs. So it's been obviously topic across the globe for several months. How has that conversation, the tenor of that conversation, impacted your role dealing with foreign companies and foreign governments? And can you give a couple of examples?
Yeah, great question. Actually, it's front of mind right now because I just got off a call yesterday with one of my colleagues in Mexico, and the businesses in Mexico are, I don't know how else to say it, but freaking out because they don't know what's going to happen. I have a local company in Twinsburg that is supposed to go on a trip in February down to Mexico to interview potential new distributors, and those distributors some of them have already canceled the meeting. They're saying, we don't know what's going to happen, so we don't want to sign on with a new U.S. company if our goods are going to get a 20% tax at the border, or if the rhetoric continues that, apparently Americans don't like Mexicans, and all of a sudden, but that's what they see. I mean, we think we only see from the news. Imagine they're only getting 5 or 10 minutes tops of CNN or something like that to see the rhetoric. That's where I've seen a lot of it, is in places like Mexico, because that's been on a lot of the topics of the presentations and the speeches of the Trump administration so far. The free trade agreements as a whole, we still don't have a lot of guidance. We've gotten some general memos that we are indeed going to start looking at NAFTA to see if we can make it more advantageous to the U.S. But we don't have a Secretary of Commerce right now. We don't have all the other appointees that go under the Secretary of Commerce, so we just have the career staffers. And we can't go until the Secretary of Commerce goes on free trade agreements. But I think what the current rhetoric and discussions are doing is making the rest of the world very nervous about dealing with us going forward if we're going to put these VAT taxes and change our strategy to more of an isolationist than a globalist approach. Everyone's kind of waiting and seeing in our department, but also I think around the world too.
One thing that complicates these trade agreements very much is the relative strength and weakness of the currencies, which I don't think, and this is the question, can really be addressed in a quote-unquote trade agreement. For example, one of the big impacts on our trade with Mexico between when NAFTA was put in and today was when NAFTA was put in, it was 4 pesos to the dollar. Today it's 21 pesos to the dollar. So that, my guess would be that that's the #1 driver behind the increase in trade, not NAFTA.
It is.
But the peso.
It is, and that happens worldwide. Exports are actually down last year for the first time in I think it's 8 years. And a lot of it is to do with the strong dollar, and that folks can't afford our products right now because of the currency exchange. And you're right, that doesn't get addressed in free trade agreements other than, for example, China, some folks accuse them of manipulating their currency and keeping it artificially low. Free trade agreements in most cases do agree or do address that the currency should be a market currency and not manipulated. But you're right, that is the #1 driver right now of exports is currency. Because, as you said, if our goods are 5 times more expensive than they were 15 years ago, and we're not necessarily benefiting from that because we still get paid in dollars. We don't get paid in pesos. So you're right, a lot of companies are having to find different markets because their current customers aren't buying as much due to the strong dollar. But so that's something that we always try and keep front of mind to make sure that especially U.S. customers or U.S. companies are aware of. Any other questions? No? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Heiser. Certainly a timely and interesting topic, and a lot to think about and a lot to resolve going forward, it would appear. Thanks for our greeters, Mimi Becker and Ron Barnhouse today, and the audio-visual crew, Tom Page, Tom Tobin,
James Field and Ron Barnhouse, and our service learning student, Ariana. Thank you again for being here. Today's Rotabuck drawing. The payout is $13. The jackpot is $251. Todd, if you would do the honors of making one number happen. The last four, 8829.
Oh, my gosh. This is Catherine. Catherine had to leave early.
Yeah. Oh, you're an honest person. There you go.
We'll see what I get, right? Thank
go.
you.
Reminder, next week there will be a meeting of the club board in the Greenwood dining room following the meeting. And today I'll leave you with two thoughts, two different presidents. The first, it's another example of presidents being human beings and having the ability to say unbelievable things. And I can imagine this president leaning over the podium and saying, "Solutions are not the answer." Richard Nixon. And the second, from one of our early presidents, and I'll see if anybody can guess this. A popular government without popular information, or the means of acquiring it, is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. James Madison. And with that, we're adjourned. Have a great day, everybody.